Hello. How's it going? So, yeah, hello. I'm trying out a new streaming software, so forgive me if things are a little off today. I'm using OBS instead of StreamYards. So let's hope this works out okay. Hello, Andrew. How are you doing? Yes, it is time for more pain. Hey, sheep. How you doing? Uh, guys, let me know if my microphone's ultra loud or clipping or anything, because this is the first time I'm using this to do a stream, and my audio keeps saying that I'm breaking the limits. I'm surpassing my limits. So yeah, we're gonna get into the next video in Domo's series of "You Got It Wrong," wah. So this next one is just titled "Mauler." It does not assist the narrative whatsoever, and I don't really know what he's going for here. All good, man. Are you feeling better this week? Yes, I'm feeling a little better. Um, yeah, last week I came down with some sort of like throat thing. I don't think it was strep throat, but it was one of those things where just my throat wasn't working well. I'm still a little sniffly and stuff, but I can talk. I can rant. I can rant for hours again. Oh, you meant me, sheep? Oh no. I missed you guys too. I missed the stream. I miss watching stuff and different things. So before we get into the video, um one little thing. Uh I've tried out I'm using OBS to stream this right now. And it worked out really well when streaming games. So if that works out, we could bring back live streaming games just because playing games with OBS has been a lot easier than StreamYards. StreamYards is basically just not built for gaming to stream. So gaming streams may make a comeback. That might be a thing. Also, I'm after attempting several times, I've I think I might just discontinue the Sekiro thing. I kept trying to play more, and then I kept just being like, man, I don't know if it's Sekiro burning me out or if Elden Ring burnt me out, but I kind of just don't want to get good anymore. I'm tired of wasting time suffering through a game to finish it when I could have fun playing one of the like 50 other games I've got in my library right now. So no more Sekiro. So sadly, I'm sorry. Let's see. We'll be coming up to the year's anniversary of ESAS, won't we? Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Elden Ring roasted you out. You're tired of dying over and over. That is true. That is very true. Um, yeah. Well, this year is going to be interesting because we're going to be hitting 1 year sort of anniversary of ESAS, which I forget when I uploaded the first one. I'm probably not going to do a 1 year anniversary special for that just because it's like 1 year of streaming once a week. I don't really consider it that special, but um, that's fair. At least you gave it a go, man. I tried. I tried. I enjoyed it sometimes. Just other times is it's kind of like just dealing with the same sort of FromSoft problems in all their games. Kind of becomes an issue with like different keylogging issues and stuff like that. But yeah. This year, getting back to what I was saying, this year will be interesting because we are going to have a 10-year anniversary of being on YouTube, which says a whole lot considering I don't have over 4,000 subscribers yet. You think after a decade I'd be doing better, but that'll be fun. It's special to me and sheep. Yeah, that's the thing. I think I may have already missed the. I think I may have all. I think I may have missed the actual anniversary. Actually, let me check. See, did I miss it? Yeah, I missed the first episode anniversary. It would have been January 6th, which I don't think would have fallen on a Saturday this year. But yeah, I already missed it. But I'm glad you guys are here. I'm glad you guys appreciate ESAS. I'm glad we created this little ESAS community. No matter how small it is, it's fun to have. It's fun to just talk about whatever, and react to things. Let's see. The Sheep says the same problems, and I think they were way too obsessed with the game being hard. The bosses are too overly complicated for no reward. Yeah, that's one thing. Is the boss that made me like reconsider playing the game was I got to the like butterfly lady. Really struggled through her first phase, and then after I beat her, I was like, oh, yay, it's over. And then phase two came up, and it's basically the exact same fight again, but now she's a little bit more aggressive with like one moveset, and she summoned dudes, and I was like, okay, 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 I'm gonna do other things now. Later game. Yeah, and then here we are. So yeah. Let's see. Yeah, ESAS is special to us. I'll never forget when I popped in after seeing your DS2 commentary and going, oh my god, the guy is streaming. Thank you. DS2 has done so much for my channel. I kind of owe DS2 a good bit because that was, I think, my biggest video that actually had me like talking before I moved a bunch of stuff over to like other channels. Yeah, I actually have considered making sort of a sort of like a sort of micro commentary for Scholar. I had thought about that, and I had thought about doing one for Dark Souls 1, but I don't really know if I could ever really tackle those things properly, given what I've already done with Dark Souls 2 and what I've already done with, or what Matthew Matosis did with Dark Souls 1, right? Like the reason I made the Dark Souls 2 video in the first place was because Matthew Matosis did not. It was just kind of a thing of he did Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1. I wanted to give it a try and do Dark Souls 2. Then I did Dark Souls 3, and here we are. you know. Let's see here. Back to those early days of just boss tier and music tier rankings. I know, we've grown so much. We've grown so much since then. It's only been a year. Don't mention his name. Please no more of that guy. Alright. Sorry, Sheep had to be done, huh? Pretty sure come the end of this, Domo is going to be added to the don't mention list. I mean, this is one thing. I can deal with people having a different opinion as long as they're coming from it in like a like if their logic makes sense based on their experience, right? I can understand like a difference of opinion. But it is one of those things where just things are going to get weirder as time goes on. Also, it doesn't help Domo's case when he sort of like the context around this series is very sort of petty in a way, on top of some of the thumbnails he uses, and it's trying to make a point without actually recording your own voice to do it. Like it feels oddly lazy and over the top at the same time. But anyway, let's get into this. So yeah, here we go. I've been trying to figure out how to add chat to my window, which is giving me issues. I would really like to create like a chat bubble that could like have chat on. I'm basically trying to copy EFAP, right? I'm really trying to copy EFAP, and I would love to copy EFAP effectively if I could, because their format's really nice, and that way I wouldn't have to record extra. I wouldn't have to record the chat separately later and then add it later, and I would like to improve. I'm trying desperately to improve here, and it's ending up with mixed results, to say the least. See, let me see if I can add chat. Let me see if I can figure out how to add chat to this. Trying to figure out. All right, let's see if I can do this. See if I can copy the link. Let me see if I can figure out how to add chat to this. Oops. How to add chat to this. Oops. All right. I need to work on this on my own time. I'm wasting time here. I keep screwing stuff up. I had like a doubling effect. Anyway, I'd like to find out how to make EFAP chat like appear, like EFAP's chat, how the chat is on the right and it's live. I'd like to figure out how to do that, but I'm not smart enough yet. I've not quite understood it yet. See, not only that, but his tone is literally the same, overly toxic, degrading, and smug one with just his script that other DS2 lovers have. Yeah. It's that thing where when you deliver something smugly, there can be a charm to that if you're absolutely correct, right? But the problem is, a lot of times, a lot of the people that defend Dark Souls 2 sort of irrationally, like there are things in Dark Souls 2 to defend, right? Like again, it's a bad Souls game, but I don't think it's a bad game, right? It has significant issues compared to the series it's part of, but overall, I think it's actually a pretty good game, all things considered. But it's one of those things when you try defending it, you end up with the issue of you sound like you're kind of pissed when you defend it in such a smug way. You know, like there are genuine things to defend in Dark Souls 2. There are certain criticisms in there that I think are at the very least worth discussing. Like they're not just flat out just it's obvious that there are problems. You know, like hitboxes are a big one, right? Like they're a very obvious like okay, the game is messed up. You have to acknowledge these things are messed up, right? In terms of some of the variety of bosses being rather samey, that's something that we can debate about. You know, just because a lot of bosses are, you know, X, Y, or Z, where they basically look different, but their moveset isn't that different. Um, but anyway, I need to catch up on chat, and then we need to start the video because otherwise we'll just be here talking about DS2 before actually reacting to the video. Yeah, I've noticed it, but never mentioned some streams has had chat like EFAB and others haven't. Yeah. What's the thing? Like, well, take you a little bit behind the scenes, right? Whenever I do the re-uploads of these on the ESAS channel, I will record the chat separately and then add it in the section where I want it to be. So I'm doing like a really crappy version of EFAP with that kind of thing. You know, but like in terms of the live stream, I would actually like to be able to, you know, have it like over there. I'm just not quite sure how to get it to work. I just wonder. I just wonder how best to do this because I just wish I knew how to do stuff. I really wish I knew how to do stuff. Let's see. I say lovers with extreme emphasis. The guys who think DS2 does no wrong, he speaks pretty much identically to them, which is scary. Yeah. It's one of those things where I feel like it just like Dark Souls 2 I think was the first great divide in the fandom in terms of like why do you like these games kind of a thing. You know, because there's like a consistency with Demon Souls and then Dark Souls. You know, where there's like a there are certain levels of things that we could agree are kind of either underwhelming, we could debate if they're terrible, or we can all agree they're terrible, right? You know, like Bed of Chaos is notoriously like a terrible boss, right? But it's one of those things where like ever since Dark Souls 2, the fandom seems to have started like fracturing into different chunks, right? Where just we have all these different takes that are massively split like across like they're not like a thing where we overlap significantly on things we can agree are bad. It's like we are diametrically opposed to each other in terms of like both sides of these arguments for DS2 and some games later on. It's very strange. It's very strange. You know, and I think I've thrown this out there before, where I feel like part of the reason why people think that Dark Souls 2 is either the best or the worst ties back to how you overcome the challenge in it. This will be the last rant that I'm going to catch up on chat. Then we're going to watch the video. I promise. But I think part of the problem with discussing Dark Souls 2 is that Dark Souls 2 is very one-dimensionally difficult with its very one-dimensionally, yeah, very one-dimensionally, very. Dark Souls 2 is very one-dimensionally difficult. Usually relying on crazy numbers, either in stats, in the number of enemies, in just that's typically it, really. And then ambushes that are built basically to kill you. Like they're not meant to surprise you and deal damage; they're meant to kill you. Like they do enough damage to kill you most of the time. So those are significant issues that you have with the game if you find it unfair. The problem is, once you know where those numbers are, the game becomes drastically easier once you're aware of life gems and where the ambushes are, right? It's one of those things where once you have the knowledge, the game becomes ridiculously easy by comparison to the other games, right? There's still an extra dimension of difficulty in the other games that is largely lost in Dark Souls 2 upon learning where the bullshit is, right? And I feel like the divide comes because players that love Dark Souls 2 got really punished by the game, and then once they figured out the systems in the game, they got really good at the game. But instead of seeing the design of it being negative in terms of the simplistic way to overcome these challenges, they took it as, oh, I got an extra good at the hardest Souls game, right? Whereas we, on sort of like the other side of that, thought, wow, I overcame the easiest Souls game once I knew that they had two tricks they use over and over, and that's it. You know, like I feel like it's a thing where the split is more about personality type and your perception of the game as opposed to what the game actually is, it seems. Like, it seems like there's a significant divide in terms of people talking about the game versus their experience with the game. And it seems like a really weird split between those two groups, where one's talking about their experiences and the other's talking about the actual game, right, in terms of what's in the game and where the challenge has issues. We're essentially arguing past each other, right? Like, we don't care about their experiences, you know, unless they're relevant to like the mechanics that are actually in play, right? And then they don't care about our objective observations of the problems in the game, so they focus on the experience so much, and we're just talking past each other over and over and over. All right. Now I will catch up with chat, and then we will watch video. Let's see. I'll defend some of the stuff they introduced, which were smothered by all the bad things in it. Cough, ADP, cough. Yeah, I think ADP could have been a better stat. It's definitely better than Resistance. I will say that right now. From Dark Souls 1, Resistance was just useless. I really don't know why they even bothered having that stat. But I wish it did. I wish it did more. I wish it did a lot of the effects it did, except messing with iframes. I think that's the biggest thing that you should not have a stat tied to. In terms of like using your equipment faster and stuff like that, I'm okay with that. I think that makes sense, right? Like, if you level up, you should get better at something, right? But in terms of the iframes thing, I don't think iframes should be touched. At least DS2 didn't have NPCs with boss health bars, unlike some of DS3 worst bosses. And Elden Ring. Yeah. Yeah. When you give NPCs boss level health bars, it is one of those things that I think undermines the experience of. You have all the problems of NPC combat, and then you have none of the advantages of a boss encounter that's specifically crafted, right? Like, it's just number cranking. You know? Alright. My god, that Leda gank fight gets way too much praise. It's so bad. There's just so much. Anyway, now we can actually get into this. Let me see if I can. Actually, wait, can I show this on screen? Oh, I can. I can put this on screen. That's handy. Maybe that's what I need to do. Maybe I need to take the actual chat box and put it, like, overlay it over something. See, there's some chat right there. I can have chat on screen. I need to remember that. Basically a big middle finger to casters where they just roll 2 out of every 3 spells. Yeah, like the auto rolling is ridiculous. Anyway, we need to get to the video. All right, I'm going to pull chat out for the rest of this video, and then I'll probably do what I normally do and edit in chat in post. But I think I figured out how to have chat now, so I think we'll figure out how this goes moving forward. So unless you use super specific spells, it's terrible. Yeah. Anyway, all right, now let's get into Mahler. It does not assist the narrative whatsoever. And let's see, he's got an intro, Drangleic, even real, dementia, inconsistencies, summary. Okay, this is gonna be oh man. Just from seeing the chapter names, I already have an idea of what this video might be about. It might be one of those things where Dark Souls 2 isn't physically real, man, like Lordrum was. It's messing up the fabric of reality because of some bullshit lore thing I found. It's still cool, man. Like, I feel like we're about to go on a hippie trippy journey here.
Perhaps you've seen it. Maybe in a dream.
Please don't be a lore vid. Please, Domo, no.
Is this some sort of a dream?
I hope this isn't one of those things where he just voices over things randomly.
Welcome to yet another
okay.
Mahler response. Probably the last.
Probably the last. Proceeds to make like another 10 videos after this. We see how that went.
In this one I will cover some of the themes of Dark Souls 2, and how much Mahler managed to pick up on them.
So, he begins the statement with describing Dark Souls 2's world as nonsensical and free associative. He then describes it as a nightmare. Now, the reason I have trouble accepting that word is that there is an element of horror to it, of narrative structure, when it's clear that you simply have corridors and then set pieces with no creativity in conjoining the levels, nor a recognition from the game itself that these things shouldn't be able to coexist. Let's be
His audio is quite low. I turned it down. Let me turn it back up.
very straightforward about this.
In Drangleic, the flow of time is convoluted. Things shift and waver, twist and turn.
Long ago, when this very land was called something else. We say Drangleic now, but countless kingdoms have risen and fallen on this very spot. And this won't be the last. Oh no.
In Dark Souls 3 they've made it more obvious that space is convoluted, and that it already had been convoluted in DS2, by placing the Earthen Peak windmill directly in the highly convoluted dreg heap. The windmill is literally the central piece of this area. But in this video I will focus on narrative structures and themes in Dark Souls 2 that play into this nonsensical world layout.
Okay, this is besides the point, but why are you showing us footage of you randomly dodging to get this person to kill themselves? It's just like, why did you show this? As a Scottish person, that accent is very offensive. Well, it is what it is. But, yeah, talking about this, like, the sort of, like, flow of time. Let's see, where's that bit with the text on it? There it is. In Drangleic, the flow of time is convoluted, things shift and waver, twist and turn. Yeah, it's one of those things where I think I can already see where his argument's going is, you know, it's like this world has been shifting. It's sort of unrealistic in the way that it exists, in a way. Except Dark Souls consistently existed. It was a consistent world. It wasn't one of those things where you put a lava fortress in the sky above an area where you can see the sky. That's one of those things where if your lore is trying to say one thing, but the level design is saying something else, you might need to reconsider what those two things are doing together. You know, like a good example of making a world that shifts and turns would be something like The Evil Within, right? Where it's all a simulation, right? It's all a simulation within whatever the program is that like lets you go through these experiences in the Evil Within games, right? Like, that is an actual world where it makes sense for things to randomly shift and change and do whatever, right? Demon Souls is consistent. Dark Souls is consistent, right? Things make sense logistically where all the areas are, right, in terms of where everything is. DS2 has a bad case of inconsistencies to the point of just outright slapping levels together that have nothing connecting them, right? Earthen Peak to Iron Keep is the classic example, right? There's no logical way that exists the way it does in a logical world, right? Which flies in the face of everything in Dark Souls 1, because Dark Souls 1 is logical, right? All of the lava areas are around the same place in the lower section of the world. All of the crypts and underground sort of like catacomb areas are in their own little section in the lower bit of the world. You know, a lot of the human civilization or the hollow civilization areas are near each other in sort of the mid-range, and then Anor Londo stands atop it all as kind of like high society, pretty much, right? They all logically exist in the world consistently, right? And they all make sense where they are, given what you do, right? Like, you descend from Undead Burg into the like lower bit of Undead Burg, where you go into the depths, and then you go from the depths into Blighttown, right? You essentially go from the town into the sewer, into the bog underneath it, right? Like, it logistically makes sense for these levels to be connected in the way they are. It's just one of those things where, again, this is one thing I mentioned. If Dark Souls 2 came out before all the other games, it would have a significantly lower amount of criticism, right? Because it's not following up two games that basically defined the genre that From was doing with this stuff, right? And it had significant problems because of that. And it's one of those things where if this came out first, a lot of the criticisms would be hand-waved, because they wouldn't be criticisms at that point. They would just be things the devs didn't quite get as good as they could have, right? But the problem is, this game came out after two games that do a lot of things very, very well. And so when you do this kind of shit, where the world, like, it's like, yeah, Solaire mentioned the flow of time being convoluted, you know, and like, Solaire mentions this type of stuff, but the world itself is not breaking apart, right? The world is not randomly set with random levels here and there. And this is one thing too. Dark Souls 2 doesn't even commit to having a crazy level design, right? It doesn't. There are just blatant inconsistencies, right? And that's the thing that, you know, this is one reason where the Evil Within is a good example. It's because you randomly shift from this level to this level to this level in a way that fits the nightmare sort of cosmetic of the way the storytelling is being told through a literal, like, nightmare, right? You are literally inside of someone's brain who is constructing the environment around you. It is not a physical thing. In Dark Souls 1, the world is absolutely a physical thing. All of it exists. All of it exists logically, right? Dark Souls 2 just said, screw it. We're going to put a lava world in a cavern above a world that doesn't show the lava area above it whatsoever, right? It's one of those things where if the entire game was like that, if the entire game had just random areas connected to each other, there could at least be an argument that they were trying to go for this random sort of twist and turn approach. The problem is, most of Dark Souls 2's areas, even though there are inconsistencies in between where you see things, they do logically try to stick together most of the time. So when something like Iron Keep happens, where you have this giant area that is in a place where it should totally not be, you're not being consistent within the game itself, right? Like, you're not being consistent within the game itself, right? And that's what it ultimately comes down to. If you cannot prove it, like if the game is, you know, doing roughly interconnected logic, right? Like traditional interconnected logic throughout most of the game, and then we have a couple areas that are just way out there, you're not making an area that twists and turns that much. You just got lazy after making the levels and then just slapped them in. Right? Like that's not an excuse for the levels being interconnected in a way that does not make sense and does not work visually. See, control was good for things shifting about in the old house. See, when you look at recreations of the map of DS2, parts literally overlap where they should be, like Aldia's Keep and Dragon Lake Castle. Yeah, yeah. In that clip you showed of Mahler, I think does go over the fact that the 3D map of Dark Souls 2 does have that overlapping problem. Let's see, lava should be in the sky, boxed in within a castle on top of a windmill. Yeah, let's work. Let's work on that. Castles must move whenever you go through a tunnel as well. Sheep. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember that the bit in the Shaded Woods right before Dragon Lake Castle, where the tower's on the left when you go straight down a tunnel, and when you come out, it's on the right. It's one of those it's one of those things where I just wouldn't even show. I wouldn't even show the castle at that point in the background. I would just have the area be covered in like forest greenery. You can't see the sky, and then you get out, and then there's a castle, right? And this is one thing. A lot of the problems with this too are the developers were kind of lazy with the way that they built things for background imagery. So you end up with the problem of the backdrops not matching the actual locations, and just the few times that we see the shift being obvious, between backdrop being wrong and actual area existing that are incongruous to each other. Those are the moments where it breaks, and you're like, oh, they just didn't have the background set properly. It's not even really the level itself at that point. It's just the background texture or whatever is used just is flat out wrong, just because they just didn't feel like making it consistent. See, exactly. If you don't like it, you're just whining and don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. DS1 created a world and decided what they wanted the player to do and where they wanted them to go. DS2 wanted boss fights in tough areas and cobbled them into whatever they fancied. Yeah. Well, it is an interesting argument when you look at Dark Souls 1 by comparison, right? Like there are obvious areas that are sort of cobbled together. Like it's pretty, I'd say it's pretty well known that Lost Izalith was rushed during development. And you can kind of tell because when you get through the demon ruins and you actually get down to Izalith itself, it's basically just one big pool of lava with like a couple buildings and then the main area, which wouldn't take that long to create in like a level creator, right? By comparison to like Undead Burg, for example, where you have a lot of looping pathways and interconnected shortcuts between different places, right? Like it's one of those things where you can tell that certain areas of Dark Souls 1 had to sort of wrap up before they could like give them the proper FromSoft level design. But there are things in this game where it's just they just got some things flat out wrong. It's different from being rushed versus not completing the idea appropriately at all. It's just filled with dragon bums. Yes, it's just filled with dragon bums. Actually, let's go to this DS3 point as well. The DS3 point of the world kind of crumbling together, I think, is something that I think is worth talking about, but I don't know if talking about it in terms of comparing it to what Dark Souls 2 did as something that works together, right? Because like saying the world is falling apart and then citing DS2 for getting a few things wrong, is like it doesn't match. Like the logic is not consistent going from A to B, right? Like Dark Souls 1's world is consistent, right, throughout its entire run. I'm pretty sure. I don't think there's any like major issues in terms of backdrops not matching up with something else. But Dark Souls 2 has a couple areas that are just blatantly off for whatever reason. Iron Keep we've mentioned, Dragon Lake Castle, the tunnel where the tower shifts sides, Aldia's Keep existing like overlapping with another area that it shouldn't when you look at the 3D map. There's there's just stuff like that is stuff that's not lore bound. It's just people making blatant mistakes. Right? Just blatant mistakes are leading to those things being the way they are. Dark Souls 3 having the world sort of crushed together at the end doesn't fix Dark Souls 2's problem, right? And this is one thing that I've seen a lot, where people try to retcon something as something that makes sense, when in the actual game, it still does not make sense, right? Why is most of the world logical, and then it falls apart randomly at random intervals? when we have several long periods of time afterwards in Dark Souls 3 where that does not happen, right? Like it's one of those things where, like, you look at sort of the precursor to playing the story of Dark Souls 1, right? Not the lore, but like the actual story of the player character doing stuff in Dark Souls 1, right? The world is consistent. The player does their thing. The story ends, technically, right? Dark Souls 2 happens. The world is inconsistent. The player does their thing, you know, and we move on, right? Like several generations have passed. Like, I don't know how much time takes place in between each of these games, but like a long period of time goes by in between Dark Souls 1 and 2, right? Okay, so the world is a little shiftier, right? Let's be generous with this. The world is a little shiftier in Dark Souls 2, right? A couple of the areas don't match up. There's a little bit of like inconsistencies there. Now let's look at Dark Souls 3, right? Another long sort of time jump, I would assume. And then Dark Souls 3 world exists. It exists consistently until the very end of the game, right? When you have the killing of the first flame and everything being turned to ash, right? And one thing I always interpreted from that is Dark Souls 3's ending and both DLCs are essentially about the end of the Dark Souls universe, right? The end of the Dark Souls world, right? It is being so destroyed and warped by the linking of the fire that it is causing issues, right? This is one thing that I think does work in Dark Souls 3's favor, regarding the way that works. But this is the thing: just because Dark Souls 3 did this, where it contextualizes it as the world sort of falling in on itself and collapsing in on itself because of all the damage done to the world, that is something that can work as an ending. The problem with Dark Souls 2, however, is that if you're going to make this argument for Dark Souls 2 stuff, why does everything make sense in Dark Souls 3 right until the end, when the end of the universe happens, right? Like, it's that inconsistency of, like, if the world is shifting, it should be consistently shifting and getting worse and worse as we go through Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3. The problem is Dark Souls 3 doesn't have that until the very end of the game and the Ring City DLC and the Dread Keep, right? Those are the only two areas that have that, and they are positioned at the end of the universe, right? If Dark Souls 2 world started breaking down, we should have seen the breakdown of the world during the main sections of Dark Souls 3, not just at the ending, right? It's that consistency, right? The consistency is gone if you're trying to make this argument, and that's the thing that I think makes this argument fall flat, because this is not... You're not countering the argument by bringing Dark Souls 3 in. If anything, it just kind of proves that Dark Souls 2 has a problem, you know, from a level design perspective that cannot be defended by the lore. All right, time to catch up on chat. All right. Let's see, it's just filled with... Oh, wait, yeah, I already read that. I like it as it ties off the story. It's just a shame DS2 didn't really tie into DS1 at all, story-wise, so the trilogy is pretty inconsistent, and game mechanics are different across all three games. Yeah, I've mentioned this before. Several times. That the inconsistencies across the series aren't necessarily a problem of the games themselves, but they're not problems within the games themselves most of the time, but there is a significant issue where when you have a series, the general rule of thumb is that you need to have the mechanics improving over time, right? Like a Call of Duty is a really good example, right? If you go back to kind of like look at Modern Warfare, right? The original Modern Warfare in 2007, then go up to Black Ops 2 in 2012, I think. Right, if you look at those games, right, the formula for playing those games is largely the same. What happens is the expansion in what you do during the sequences, right? Like, COD 4 has a lot of very simple shooting, running and gunning sort of things, but has some stealth sections, right? But then you get things that kind of shake things up with excuse me. You get things that shake things up, like with the AC-130 mission, where you're protecting the group, right? You know, that's a huge changer where you're not just a guy on a machine gun in a vehicle versus, you know, a guy on the ground just holding a gun, right? Then you get World at War, where you have a mission where you are an actual tank, right? So there's a consistency with that. In Modern Warfare 2, you have several different encounters of doing different things, right? that are sort of new for that particular franchise. Like, you're still running and gunning and shooting, but there are new elements added, like breaching parts of the walls and slow-mo stuff, or like breaching doors. You come out of the water and kill dudes in unique ways. In a one mission, cliffhanger has you going through a snowstorm. Where you'd use I keep wanting to say snow speeder, and that's Star Wars. That's not real life. The snowmobile. Yeah, it's like you use that. You get onto a Zodiac in the final mission when you're going after Shepard. You get to pilot not pilot. You get to be the gunner of a Humvee in one of the opening missions. Different. The expansion of what you do besides the core gameplay is happening in that series as it progresses, but you still have that bedrock of the main gameplay consistencies of running and gunning and shooting, right? And then you get Black Ops, which introduced like the dolphin dive, right? Like some funny move or some weird move you do while sprinting, and you hit the crouch button, right? And then other games started adding in like the slide and stuff like that. It's one of those things where the game mechanics are largely the same, but they are getting more complicated, and there are more options being available without negating previous things, right? And that's the kind of thing. When you look at the Souls trilogy, and I'm going to say the Dark Souls trilogy specifically, just because they are the same brand names, so they should have consistencies, right? Demon Souls didn't have to be like Dark Souls 1. None of the Dark Souls games had to be like Demon Souls. That didn't have to be like Elden Ring. Bloodborne didn't have to be like any. They're all separate franchises, right? The Dark Souls trilogy, however, is a trilogy of games, so there should be consistencies. Dark Souls 2 changes so much from Dark Souls 1. It's truly baffling how the developers thought, hey, let's radically change up almost every system in the game. Right? Let's change iframes to where they're affected by a stat. Let's give them, instead of giving them large chunks of Estus in groups, let's just give them individual shards they have to find throughout the world. Let's give them life gems that slowly regenerate health. Let's give them a bunch of regeneration items for both spells and healing. Let's, just a different thing, like all of those things, right? Let's give them 2 more ring slots. There are so many changes in Dark Souls 2, and then going from Dark Souls 2 to 3 that are dropped, it makes Dark Souls 2 feel like such an oddball compared to Dark Souls 1 and 3, right? And this is one thing, I think they could have taken some ideas from Dark Souls 3 and done something with them in a more interesting manner. But they clearly wanted to go back to the approach of Dark Souls 1's sort of design philosophy with Dark Souls 3 to some degree, right? But it's just one of those things where the inconsistencies become a problem because playing the games is a weird shift when you go from one to the other. Right? And this is the thing where Dark Souls 3 feels like a progression of Dark Souls 1's systems, right? It does introduce FP, which in turn rebalances several things, but they use that to help incorporate weapon arts, which make the weapons a little deeper because now they have special moves they can do, right? It's that thing where they are building on the previous mechanics, not just throwing in random things and hoping they stick, which is largely what Dark Souls 2 does. It just throws in a random mechanic or changes a mechanic randomly and then just kind of moves on, right? Like it doesn't, a lot of ideas in Dark Souls 2 are just kind of thrown in sort of haphazardly, and since Dark Souls 3 cut out a lot of those ideas, I think it's safe to say that a lot of those ideas were either not good or at the very least were not considered by the developers to be worth developing for Dark Souls 3. And that is kind of an issue with the trilogy in terms of kind of going over their consistencies. I'm still here. I'm just a bit of a dum-dum with lore, so I'm listening intently. Well, this isn't lore, so like it's okay. I think DS2 would have been received better if it was a sequel to Demon Souls rather than Dark Souls, as it seems that's the game the devs took inspiration from. Yeah, I would agree, and I noted that in my Dark Souls 2 commentary video where I went over how Dark Souls 2 feels a lot more like a Demon Souls sequel than a Dark Souls sequel. Given how the life gems are almost exactly like the grass with a couple tweaks. The world design is much more pathway based as opposed to being a big glob of a world with different areas that interconnect. Like Demon Souls had basically 5 different, I think it's 5, right? 5 different pathways to go down, and once you completed them all, you were basically done with the game, right? Dark Souls 2 has something similar where a lot of the pathways in the beginning of the world are very linear in terms of going from one area to the next. In terms of like the levels themselves, not the individual parts of each level, but the levels themselves, right? With a couple of exceptions, right? Like if you go to, just for example, like you go to Forest of Fallen Giants or Hades Tower, right? And then from Hades Tower, you go to No Man's Wharf, right? And then from either No Man's Wharf or Forest of Fallen Giants, you go to the Lost Bastille, and then you go to Sinner's Rise, and then that pathway's over, right? Like the pathway's done, right? You don't need to go back through there except for like quest lines and stuff, right? But progression-wise, you don't need to go back. When you look at the pathway, from Huntsman's Copse, it goes from Huntsman's Copse to Earthen Peak. Then it goes to Iron Keep, and then that pathway is basically done, right? Then you've got the pathway where you go through the rat area near Majula. I forget what it's called at the moment. Then you go through the gutter. Then you go to Black Gulch, and then that area's done, right? And then you've got that one pathway that goes from Shaded Woods and then branches off towards Doors of Pharos, and then Brightstone Cove Seldora, right, where you finish off that pathway. And then you go to Drangleic Castle through the Shaded Woods pathway. And then you go Drangleic Castle, you go Shaded Woods, then to Drangleic Castle, then to Shrine of Amana, then to the Undead Crypt. Then you go back to Shaded Woods. Then you go to Aldia's Keep. Then you go to the Dragon Eyrie. Then you go to the Dragon Shrine. And then you go to the Memories of the Giants. And then depending on what you want to do at the end of the game, you either go back to Undead Crypt to kill Vendrick, or you go back to Drangleic Castle and finish the game. Right? It's one of those things where level progression-wise, it's a lot more linear than Dark Souls 1. Right, it's much more in line with Demon Souls, where you have pathway, maybe with a branching path here and there, but by the end of that pathway, you have killed a boss, and you will warp back to the beginning and take another pathway, right? Or you will continue down another pathway that you may have started but haven't finished yet. There's a lot of consistencies with that in Demon Souls as opposed to Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 1 in that regard. And again, I mentioned the life gems being like the grass, stuff like that. It's just just a lot of the... It is one of those things where I feel like if they commit it... I think that one of the biggest problems with Dark Souls 2 is that they tried to make it a Demon Souls sequel while also making it a Dark Souls sequel, and there are just too many inconsistencies between those two titles to make a cohesive game work, in my opinion. I think if they just committed and were able to make a Demon Souls sequel, I think that would have been better than trying to make a sequel to Dark Souls that's trying to be a sequel to Demon Souls. Now, I know there was obviously like legal problems with making a sequel to Demon Souls because of Sony and all this other crap. Like a bunch of legal crap, right? Prevented them from making a proper sequel. That's why Dark Souls is a spiritual successor. But it is one of those things where, I think Dark Souls 2 needed to commit to something. And because it did not commit either way, we ended up with kind of the middle product where there's a bunch of mechanics that really aren't built to account for each other. And it is an issue for the game that was thankfully sort of reversed when Dark Souls 3 came around. But there are still it's still kind of sad that we went through that as sort of like a fandom going through that game, where it's like there's a lot of good ideas in Dark Souls 2 that could have been better if they committed to this game being a proper Dark Souls sequel or a proper Demon Souls sequel, right? Or another spiritual successor, right? Like if they made another game in the Dark Souls style, but just called it something else, I feel like it would have had less criticism. But because it is a Dark Souls 2, right, that implies it should be like Dark Souls 1. Yeah. I love that if you farm for a long time, you can just skip a majority of the game in DS2. Yeah, I mean, like, being able to kill enemies permanently is such a weird design choice for Dark Souls 2. Now, like, mini-bosses in, like, Dark Souls 1 and 3, like, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like, you've killed a mini-boss, you don't want to have to refight the mini-boss again. but it's still very... It's still just weird, right? That they allowed you to sort of... Like, this is one of the reasons where Dark Souls 2 does become the easiest game after a while. It gives you a ton of healing resources. A lot of the encounters are very one-dimensional. And if you just keep brute forcing it, you will eventually make your way to the boss. Because most enemies don't respawn after, I think, 10 kills. Right? So eventually you will beat the game. Like, it's the easiest game in terms of so many different elements. Right? The only difficulty comes because of the bullshit that you either don't know about or, making one mistake and getting tapped by an ability that does like 1,000 damage or something crazy. It's just that weird inconsistency compared to the other games. It's basically beeline to the Lord Soul, then bonfire back to Majula. Yeah, pretty much. It's really funny how many different bosses in DS2 can be your first boss if you farm enough, then Ava can be the first boss you fight. Yeah, or Ava. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those weird things with requirements. This is one reason why I think Dark Souls 1 and 3 requirements for beating the game make a lot more sense than Dark Souls 2 does. Now, Scholar of the First Sin did fix that in terms of you do have to kill all of the sort of old ones to progress the main story of Dark Souls 2. That is good, but that should have been the baseline, right? Like, when you have a revamp of a game to fix your problems, you should have fixed them beforehand when they're this obvious, right? DS2 should have committed and not given the warning for joining the Covenant of Champions. That would have been funny, actually. Anyway, let's get back to this. We were just about to get into some other stuff, so let's get back. I don't know how long I ranted. Wow, we've already been here like an hour. Wow. We made it 2 minutes in the video. Let's see if we can actually finish this.
To this nonsensical world layout. The first theme is the dreamlike nature of Drangliic.
This is a limbo. A link between Drangleic and the outer world.
One of the first things we hear is that Drangliic is separated from the outside world, and that things betwixt is a portal between the real world and Drangliic. In DS1 there was already a pocket dimension that was related to a half-dragon crossbreed. In DS2 there is a narrative that suggests that Drangliic has been dreamt up as well and that the Emerald Herald, who is also half-dragon, has been exiled to this pocket dimension and pulled us in once we started to go hollow.
What the hell is that clip he's showing right here? Have you guys ever seen this clip of, like... I'm gonna mute this while we talk about it. Have you guys ever seen this happen in this game where you're going across this bridge and then a drake comes by and seemingly destroys it? Because I have never seen this. Unless this is like some cut content thing. Like, legitimately, I've never seen that before. Right? I don't know if that's like a uniquely Scholar thing or what that is, but it's just weird. I do want to go back to what he was talking about with the pocket dimension, though. This is the one thing, right? If Drangliic is not real, what's the point of having that story? If Dark Souls 1 is real, and Dark Souls 2's story is largely locked in this pocket dimension, what's the point? Like, what's the point of this story being worthwhile if this doesn't mean anything? And also, why are we able to link the fire from within this pocket dimension? How would that actually affect the fire if there's the fire outside and there's a fire inside? But like this opens a can of worms for just like how overcomplicated do we want to make this? See, I've never seen it. I've seen the clip, but it's never happened to me. It seems like BS and more trolling, though. Yeah, I bet that's just like a Scholar thing that they just threw in. I don't know. I've never seen it before. I don't know if you wait too long on the bridge and a drake kills you or something, but it's a cool visual that leads to your death, so I would consider that stupid. If it's even in the game. I mean, again, I don't even really know if it actually is in the game in terms of like something you can actually encounter. For all we know, that could be just an asset that was unfinished that they left in the game but didn't actually implement, and then was in the file somewhere, and Domo found it. Yeah. It would help to have the audio on when you're trying to listen to their points. I've only played Scholar and it's never happened to me. Yes, I don't know.
In DS2 there is a narrative that suggests that Drangliak has been dreamt up as well, and that the Emerald Herald, who is also half dragon, has been exiled to this pocket dimension and pulled us in once we started to go hollow. The similarity between the Emerald Herald and Priscilla is further emphasized by the item descriptions of the peculiar doll and the aged feather.
I was born of dragons, contrived by men, by ones who would cozen fate herself. They are the ones who created me. Long have I awaited one such as you, one who might shatter the shackles of fate, one who can set me free. Bearer of the curse, it was my own manifestation that led you here. Then one day you will walk those grounds, without really knowing why.
But one day, you will stand before its decrepit gate, without really knowing why.
Drangliak is separated from the real world, and like most people in this fever-dreamish dimension, we don't even remember how we ended up here.
We call this place Majula. Not too special, if you ask me.
Is it one thing, if he's just saying all this stuff and his point's the same throughout the entire section, I'm probably going to wait until the end of it to actually make a point. So if this kind of drags on where we're just kind of watching it for a little bit, that's why. Reckon his videos would be vastly improved watching muted based on the video and a bit we've watched. Yeah, might be, but I want to hear him out.
It's just the place where everyone seems to end up. They all end up here. All the ones like you.
Oh, by the gods, why the hell am I here? I was on a journey, and somehow ended up here.
But I don't know. I just sort of ended up here. I must have just wandered in. Drang Lake. How is it that I ended up here? It's funny. I can't seem to remember. But for the life of me, I can't remember how I...
Alright, is this just the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over? It looks like it is just the same thing over and over and over.
ended up here. It's as if I were drawn to the place, or lured in. Oh, I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just daydreaming, I think. When I first came into this forsaken land, it was... a curse? Something about a curse. Inside the mansion, I found a strange map, like none I'd ever seen. I believe that it's a map of Dranglek. Now I'm traveling the land to prove it. Yes, that's it. That's why I came to the kingdom. Wait, no, that wasn't it. Then what? I don't seem to recall.
The Emerald
Okay, so yeah, so there's all that bit of like people not knowing how they got here, right? And this is one thing that I think you can interpret in multiple ways, right? You can interpret this as them going hollow, or you can interpret this as them getting sucked into this pocket dimension, if that is true. The problem with the pocket dimension thing is that you're essentially saying that if we do anything that affects the fire in a pocket dimension, it affects the outside world. So at that point, you may as well not be in a pocket dimension, right? So I don't think this argument actually helps DS2 at all. If anything, I think it makes it worse because it makes it look more incompetent in terms of constructing the world and how it's affected by the events that the player takes action within, right? Like, if this is not a pocket universe, then us linking the fire makes sense because that is something that would be wanted to sort of that would be something that is desired, right? To link the fire and continue, right? But if this is inside a pocket dimension, then that means that the fire is both within a pocket dimension and outside a pocket dimension, and both of those affect the fire in different ways. Kale looks like the Hunchback of Notre Dame. He does. I'm slowly going hollow right now. I'm with you there, Andrew. This is just a bit a long thing of just going. You're making the same point like 6 times in a row with just footage. I mean, probably just trying to beef up the time in the video, but it is one of those things where just this doesn't help the case about Drang Lake being real, right? Because if it isn't real, then all the events of the game shouldn't matter. Because if we link the fire here, that's probably not going to affect the fire outside of the pocket dimension, right? And this is also one thing. I'm pretty sure that the fire doesn't do anything inside the pocket dimensions, period, right? Whether you take this as a pocket dimension, or you take Dark Souls 1 Painted World, or you take the Painted World of Ariamis in Dark Souls 3, right? All of these areas are pocket dimensions. Or at least I know the ones in Dark Souls 1 and 3 are pocket dimensions. I don't know about Drang Lake. But it's one of those things where if those areas are pocket dimensions, they are largely separated from the linking of the fire and the consequences of that fire to a certain extent, right? I know we see hollows in both of those areas. We see hollows in the DS1 area, but I'm still wondering, like, if we can hide from the fire in the pocket dimension in the Painted World of Ariamis, why would linking the fire in the pocket dimension of Drang Lake do anything? Is it starting a cycle of linking the fire in its own sort of pocket dimension that we eventually leave? It's one of those things where I don't think this helps the case at all for Drang Lake being just narratively confusing and confounding, sort of in and of itself. You don't even link a fire in DS2. You either sit on a throne or don't. Yeah, but for all intents and purposes, you link the fire, quote unquote, because that's what the ending is sort of listed as. But yeah, you don't actually link a fire. You just kind of sit in a tomb or walk away from it. You know, but just, again, it's one of those things where it's like, I don't think this actually helps questioning whether Drang Lake is real or not. And personally, I think this is open to interpretation. I think that you can interpret this as a pocket dimension to some degree, or it's just a contrived mess to drag all these people that are hollowing to Drang Lake, right? Like, you can look at it in multiple different ways where it makes sense. So it's just one of those things that I think is problematic no matter which way you slice it.
Harold pulled us into this dimension, which might have been the world of boundless possibilities she imagined, but the more important theme is loss of memory and loss of self, caused by the undead curse.
This is relatively consistent. It's boring, but it's consistent. Areas take after each other one by one, connected by very weak corridor-like structures. There is no melting into each other like you would see in The Evil Within, Alan Wake, or Alice the Madness Returns, which are actual games about nightmarish content.
Yes, see, there's that Evil Within reference. You know,
is barely any overlap, with some minor exceptions like things betwixt getting tangled up in shaded woods. Everything mostly lines up in a very linear way, and with the warping ability it didn't need to do anything else.
I like how he hyper-focuses on overlap, while ignoring all the other confusing ways in which the world connects to each other.
Hold on a minute. See, what point were you making? Watch him say that it being boring is an opinion/subjective. Well, I mean, it's one of those things where I think you could consider it boring by comparison to the previous game in this series, right? Dark Souls 1 has a lot of areas that melt into each other in different ways through different sort of entry points. Now, some of the four corners after you connect the Lord Soul are pretty much just, you enter an area, this is the whole area, there might be an area behind it, that's it, right? But in terms of like the first half of the game and a decent chunk of the middle bit, you've got areas that are interconnecting with each other in different ways. But let's see let me re-listen to his point about this next bit.
It didn't need to do anything else.
I like how he hyper-focuses on overlap, while ignoring all the other confusing ways in which the world connects to each other. He even uses the same clip later to make fun of the inconsistent world layout, when in reality this seems to be a deliberate way of getting the player to feel like their memory is fading.
Oh man, I really hate this argument for all things inconsistent, where it's like, it's intentionally inconsistent. We designed it to be as inconsistent as it is. But you designed other things to be consistent. You designed other things logically. Oh, my brain hurts from dealing with this level of just like absurdity.
The curse slowly erodes one's memory, until even one's birthplace is reduced to a figment of a clouded past.
Home. Home?
Let's go back to that thing he's reading, right? But the bonfires are constant, a beacon for the tragically afflicted. If we're going to take this first section as literal, in terms of like it's eroding someone's memory, then the bonfires are constant. That should mean that they exist consistently. Right? If this world is warping around all over the place, why are the bonfires consistent but nothing else is? Right? You're not proving your point by just saying it's supposed to be inconsistent and then citing something, referencing something fading, when in that same description it says the bonfires are constant. That means they are consistent. It hurts my brain dealing with some of this stuff.
Of a clouded past.
Home. Home? Where is home?
My name is Lucatiel. I beg of you, remember my name, for I may not myself. I found my thoughts growing hazy. My memories are fading, oldest first.
Your past, your future, your very light.
The intro shows us losing the memory of our mother holding us as a baby, but we even forget.
Or it could be our wife holding a child, or someone we know who lost a child, or it could be an absolute nobody that we don't know. That's the problem with the intro, is it's extremely vague about the relationships between our character and the people involved. It makes no sense.
Forget how she looked like, but more importantly it also plays a trick on us by making it look like we are about to enter a building, but we are somehow already inside it. There seem to be many deliberate inconsistencies.
None will have meaning, and you won't even care. By then, you'll be something other than human.
All the nonsensical connections between areas instill a feeling of uneasiness, a subtle feeling of dread, as they mess with your subconscious understanding of direction and distance. This fits well into the dementia theme of the game, as it makes you question your memories and makes you feel like you are forgetting where you went and how long that path took. It immerses you more into the character, as it puts you into their shoes, as long as you do not go out of your way to verify that the game has been gaslighting you into questioning your memory. The changes in new game.
So, I'm just kind of done with this argument at this point. It's just like, it's not supposed to make sense, you moron. It's not supposed to make sense. It's not supposed to make sense. It's not supposed to make sense. It's like, so it doesn't make sense then, when other parts of the game do make sense. when the previous game made sense. This is not an own. You're just pointing out how this game got several things wrong, or at the very least inconsistent with the previous game. Again, it's just that thing where you're not actually helping the game. Oh man, it is one thing. If we do take this game as a game about forgetting, as a game about dementia, as a game about like things not being real, then what's the point of this game in the larger narrative of the series, right? Like, what's the actual point of it if we don't remember anything like here, and if none of this ends up mattering because it's in a pocket dimension or something? Like, it seems like this is sort of a roundabout way to make it sound interesting, while forgetting that you're completely undermining the usefulness of Dark Souls 2 in the larger story of the Dark Souls universe. It's like Domo doesn't understand that he's negatively affecting the game by making all these things say they're intentionally they're intentionally designed to make it look like your character has dementia, or it's intentionally designed in a way where it's inconsistent. It's like you're just proving that the game is inconsistent when the other game was consistent, and certain parts of this game are consistent as well. You're not actually proving your point by just saying it's inconsistent over and over and over, and having the characters randomly blurt out that they don't remember how they got here or why, and all these people saying these this is the problem with the vagueness of a lot of the ways the story is told in Dark Souls 2. There's a lot of vague things that can be vaguely interpreted in a lot of different vague ways, right? It's one of those things that doesn't actually end up telling you anything apart from this old woman in a cutscene is saying, "You'll show up here and not know why. Heh 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 heh." Like, you can interpret that in like 50 different ways. Right? It doesn't mean that there's an actual point there. It just means it's interpretable in a billion different ways.
Game Plus also re-emphasized that you cannot trust your memory, as things might just be different than you remembered them.
And in the opening areas, once again, we're following a strictly similar theme of reality to Dark Souls 1, only to give up on that at around the Lost Bastille.
Here he is talking.
I mean, I would agree with that point with Mahler. It's like we have a certain level of believability and consistency until we get to like later areas.
About the fact that you can see some early areas from Magilla, but he's ignoring the fact that they deliberately mess with your senses of direction, orientation, and scale by looking as if they are very far away, but when you walk there it's like they are right around the corner.
Again, this is just the thing where he's saying, it's cool because they're messing with you. Even though the other game didn't do that at all. And even though this game has some areas that are pretty consistent. You know, Earthen Peak is actually a good example. You can go into, like when you're in the outer mining area, you can see a balcony on the tower that you can get up to and then see the mining area from up there. That's an example of the world being consistent like in Dark Souls 1. Why isn't that inconsistent to continue throwing us off? Why does the world randomly make sense and then randomly not make sense? It's just that thing where it's like, all these instances of it being inconsistent, they were intentional, but all these areas of them being consistent are also supposed to be consistent. It's like, at this point, you're just making excuses for everything to make sense, even when it doesn't make sense. You're just saying, it's good, shut up. Just over and over and over. You're just saying, it's fine, shut up. It's fine, shut up. It's fine, shut up. It's fine, shut up. It's like, dude. This is one thing, too, is like, if this was intentionally designed to have the player have, like, dementia and be forgetful and for the world to be fading into each other, this is such a lazy, half-assed version of making that happen, right? Like, The Evil Within is a way better version of this idea, right? And I have significant problems with the first game in the Evil Within series, but like overall, like the blending of the environments is pretty consistent in the way that it's inconsistent, right? This game just kind of has a chunk that is consistent, and then later on has chunks that are not consistent. And it's one of those things where you can definitely interpret it however you want, but you can also interpret it as the developers got kind of lazy, Or they just didn't have the time and the care to finish this properly.
However, once you add Aldir's Keep and Drangleic Castle, you'll find that they overlap quite awfully with the levels that already exist. There is a disgustingly incompetent overlap that shows these places can't exist side by side when viewing it from above, and it is very likely that they made the first half of the game and had the extra pathway and shaded ruins that led to Aldir's Keep prepared but didn't teleport you instantly to another area as they do in Dark Souls 1 to get to the Lord Vessel.
Or they did it to evoke a subtle feeling that something is wrong, when you subconsciously realize that all three roads lead to the same direction.
The funny part is that you never...
All three roads lead to the same direction? What are you talking about?
Prepared but didn't teleport you instantly to another area. Shaded ruins that it is very likely that they made the first half of the game and had the extra pathway and shaded ruins that led to Aldir's Keep prepared but didn't teleport you instantly to another area as they do in Dark Souls 1 to get to the Lord Vessel.
Or they did it to evoke a subtle feeling that something is wrong, when you subconsciously realize that all three roads lead to the same direction.
The funny...
Hold on a minute, like... Mahler's talking about, like, the areas, like, with Aldia's Keep afterwards being, like... being sort of, like, haphazardly placed in the world where they don't physically exist in it because of the overlapping, and then his rebuttal is... they all take you to the same place and they're supposed to make you feel a sense of, like, uncanniness?
To get to the Lord Vessel.
Or they did it to evoke a subtle feeling that something is wrong, when you subconsciously realize that all three roads lead to the same direction.
The funny part is...
I'm legitimately confused here. It's like Mahler's making point A, and then the response is point 3. It's like, these aren't even in the same category. Like, what are we actually talking about right now? Like, how is this a response? I don't understand that. I don't understand that response on Domo's part, so I'm just going to move on.
It is that you never see this overlap in the design view in the actual world. As far as most players are concerned, the entire world is still making sense.
You might not see it, but you do feel it subconsciously.
He says the world is falling apart, which, once again, the world is fine structurally. There are a few broken pieces of rubble here and there, but everything is standing tall. The world isn't falling apart, it is just clownishly put together.
Oh, I should have listened to the warnings. This place is flippin' mental.
But what a strange place.
Calling it clownishly put together is just a negative way of interpreting it.
And your shit is just a positive way of interpreting it. If you're going to have that same logic with his opinion, then your opinion also does not stand up to snuff.
H. Bomber Guy's interpretation fits a lot more to the themes of the Souls series and especially of this game.
Of the Souls series and especially this game? What you talking about random levels being randomly smacked together? Overlapping inconsistently in a world that doesn't actually try to maintain any level of consistency half of the time, but the other half of the time tries and fails to? Damn. That pretension meter is just climbing.
The world does feel like parts of it are collapsing into each other, which could be because the world is a dream where space is convoluted, or because our character is losing their memory.
The longer I am here, the more madness I discover.
He says it's physically untrustworthy, which, again, what does that mean exactly? If we have no expectation of what's going to happen next, that anything could load up as soon as we enter into the new area, then what is there to be untrustworthy of? What I'm saying is that akin to a whole menu select design, there isn't expectation for anything. There isn't exactly anything physically untrustworthy about it.
Is he just pretending to be dense?
Don't try to play this card right now. All right, let's watch this little bit back again, because I think I know exactly what Domo's going to do.
He says it's physically untrustworthy, which, again, what does that mean exactly? If we have no expectation of what's going to happen next, that anything could load up as soon as we enter into the new area, then what is there to be untrustworthy of? What I'm saying is that akin to a whole menu select design, there isn't expectation for anything. There isn't exactly anything physically untrustworthy about it.
Is he just pretending to be dense? Note how he just overlooks the point about the Overlook Hotel.
He ends with a question of
the Overlook Hotel. What the fuck are you talking about, Domo? Like, Like, Mahler is talking about the physical untrustworthiness that H-Bomber Guy references in relation to Dark Souls 2. There's nothing untrustworthy about untrustworthy is a weird way to phrase a world where it's essentially just you get a random slice of a world after another random slice of a world. How is Mahler being dense here? He's basically just saying that the world is a sequence of areas that are sort of stitched together, and you can't really see what the next area is most of the time, or at least sometimes. Right? And then you go through it, and you find the next area, which might be a random thing for all you know. That's not being untrustworthy, that's just being random, right? Untrustworthy means that the game is leading you to one thing, and then you have something completely different. The only untrustworthy bit that I would actually say would be the transition from Earthen Peak to Iron Keep. Because you have no... there is no inference that there's going to be this giant lava castle in the sky above this poison castle that doesn't connect to anything in the sky. Right? Like, this is a thing where I feel like it's just Domo talking past Mahler's point. He's not understanding Mahler's point.
How this could be interpreted as bad, but I'm more curious as to how it could be good, and he's going to explain it.
This anomaly is so utterly blatant that it could not have gone unnoticed in the set design and construction.
That's where... What's he doing with this clip?
I'm more curious as to how it could be good, and he's going to explain it.
This anomaly is so utterly blatant that it could not have gone unnoticed in the set design and construction. The lights shining into Ullman's office would have to be positioned inside the walls of the surrounding hallway.
Seeing as how he just skipped past this point, Mahler seems to have missed the comparison to the impossible architecture of the Overlook Hotel in The Shining, where the same tricks were used to evoke similar feelings.
He then tops it off with embracing...
I like how he's not going to develop that point at all for anybody who's not seen The Shining. It's just like, remember, The Shining had something inconsistent and weird in it. Like, does that help your how does that help your argument? I've not seen The Shining. Like, how does that help? Does that help the story of The Shining, or is that just a fuck up in the set design? Like, just randomly listing stuff doesn't mean you've countered a point. You have to explain how it counters a point.
Inconsistency. That is where most will not be able to continue his video, as he has literally just made an argument in favor of general design not making any sense. Which is contrary to his entire channel's goal of explaining why things make sense, why they are put together the way they are, why they work better when they are designed with forethought and a goal.
Young Hollow, how you grapple without falter with this dreadfully twisted world.
Mahler seems to think that things have to be objectively correct, even if deliberate flaws can be used as an artistic tool to immerse the player into a dreamlike world where memory loss is a central theme of the narrative.
Did he just admit that it's okay to have intentional flaws in a game? Like, if the developers just give up and say that's the product, we don't care if it's shit, does that count as an intentional flaw? I mean, holy shit, man. I mean, part of this is just the thing where it's like, the thing that I think Mahler's gunning for with the point he just made before this bit was, when it comes to the design philosophy of a game, you need it to make sense, right? You need to have the way the game sort of orchestrates itself, or the way you orchestrate encounters in the game to lead to something. It has to have a point, right? Like, again, going back to the Evil Within. The Evil Within is set in a world where you begin by investigating a hospital, and then you randomly have an encounter where you encounter like a character in the game. I'm not going to spoil the game, but you randomly have an encounter, or you have an encounter with someone who seems to have otherworldly powers. Then everything goes black, and you wake up in a crazy space that leads you into one of the levels. Then you go through that. Then you end up in I think you end up in another level, and then you go to the hub, which is like the insane asylum place, and then you go through other levels and return to the insane asylum as sort of your hub, right? It's that thing where each area in itself is individualized in this nightmarish world where things are randomly shifting around you. The thing is, it's consistently inconsistent with where you go in all of these areas that you go to for each level design, right? Part of the point made in the level design is that this world is untrustworthy in a certain sense, because you are going through you're going through a game where the person controlling the world is trying to fuck with you. And as you go through that world, you are encountering very different encounters at random points throughout it in environments that cannot congeal physically, right? They just don't make sense to combine, right? Because it's all in a nightmare realm. It's not constricted to the physical form of reality, right? And that helps that narrative be... Well, that doesn't help the narrative. It helps the level design play into the narrative of this all being a nightmare, right? And nightmares can change at the drop of a hat. You can be in one situation in the middle of like washing your hands. You can go from being in your bathroom in your home to the middle of the Sahara Desert, covered in blood, and then you could try to like wipe your hands off in the sand, only to wake up in an insane asylum where you're just patting your bed over and over. And when you bang on the door, you knock it down, and then you find yourself falling off a skyscraper, right? Like, you can have all this random stuff tied together in a nightmare space. The problem is that he's not proven that Drangleic is a nightmare space. He's just put people saying quotes that might be interpretable as, "This shit's weird." And that's about it. It's just annoying. So it's okay to make mistakes on purpose in a game, apparently. It's just crazy.
To be objectively correct, even if deliberate flaws can be used as an artistic tool to immerse the player into a dreamlike world where memory loss is a central theme of the narrative.
Loss frightens me no end. Loss of memory, loss of self.
If you walk into the Earthen Peak windmill, and then hours or days later take the elevator up to Iron Keep, you might question your memory. Was the volcano closer to the windmill, or did you walk deeper inside than you thought? This will give you a similar feeling as the one your character is experiencing, but it seems that Mahler never considered this part of the narrative.
Okay, a general rule of thumb, it's not a good idea to confuse your viewers, right? It's not a good idea it's usually not going to be a good idea to try to confuse the people that are experiencing your medium, right? Especially when you don't make it, especially when you're not going for a twist, and this is just the general state of what the thing is, right? Like, if Dark Souls 2 had a thing where near the end you got some sort of piece of information saying that this was all like in like a world that doesn't matter, right? Like, if you looked at, like, if one of the ending cutscenes of the game had it where Aldia was talking and then mentions, but we are, but a drop of water in an ocean of cosmic possibilities, or something vague and ethereal like that, and then the camera pans out and we find out that we're just like on a rock on like a beach or something of like a bigger universe, right? Like, if you want to do something like that, that could work if you did it right. Now, for the sake of the story of Dark Souls 2, I don't think it would work, just because, but like, unless you explicitly tell the players that this is a universe that is a pocket universe of some kind, then we cannot confirm that it is a pocket universe. Which in turn means that it should be a real universe, which means that it should have consistencies of a real universe. Especially considering there's nothing that explains Iron Keep being above Earthen Peak for some reason. The most logical explanation for that is something outside of the game, where the developers were just incompetent. They had already made the level, they didn't really know where to put it, so they just stuck it over Earthen Peak.
They tried to make it so things exist alongside despite being incredibly linear, but then created late-game areas in places that they already had areas, and they were squashed in no matter what cost it had to the world. It is a damn shame they opted for settling, and you can see it in other aspects. The world has interesting levels, but the way in which they connect is lazy and nonsensical. It does not assist the narrative whatsoever, as there is only one blatantly incompetent overlap in the map and you never see it in the game.
So to summarize, it seems that Mahler missed a lot of the narrative, as the themes of Drangliak existing in a parallel universe that might have been created in the imagination of the Emerald Herald, and the theme of Halloween causing memory loss and loss of self seems to have been too subtle for him.
And then he said,
"Wow, you're just being a dick at this point, Domo. You're not even, like, you've missed half of his arguments, misinterpreted the other half of them, are saying that all of his literal arguments, right, all of those things where he proves definitive evidence of it and questions things that are sort of like up to interpretation, you are saying that your interpretation is correct by saying that his interpretation of it is ridiculous. You are not helping the defense of the Dark Souls 2 game as a whole. You're not helping the community defend this game when it has several things that you could defend, right? Several things, even at the most bare bones level, right? At full price, I still think Dark Souls 2 is worth the money. I still think you can have a lot of fun with it. I still have a lot of fun with it. It's one of my most played Souls games. Actually, I think it is my most played Souls game. Let me check that. Let me check that real quick. Let's see, of the games I've got. Let me take a look-see here. Okay, so for Dark Souls 1, basically the remaster, I've got about 500 hours in that. Dark Souls 2 has about 1,000 hours if we combine Dark Souls 2 and Scholar. Dark Souls 3 has about 700, and Elden Ring has about 1,000, right? Now, Dark Souls 2 has significantly less content than Elden Ring, but you get my point, right?
Says secret.
But you get my point, right? It's just like you can have fun with the game, right? But you're not defending it. A lot of the defenses of Dark Souls 2 often end up being attacks on people that are criticizing it, as opposed to properly defending the game on its own merits. You know, and just this shit of saying, like, apparently things were too subtle for Mahler to understand. It's like you have Mahler's blatant points are too subtle for your dumbass to understand. All right, I'm trying not to be a dick anymore. I'm trying to be a bit cleaner, but this has really got me in a mood. Said it in your first stream, but this guy is a turd. It really doesn't help shine a brighter light on Dark Souls 2 when you're actively being a dick to people who critique it. Yeah, well, it's just that thing where you're not helping the community of the game look better when you're being a vindictive ass towards people criticizing the game. If you want to talk about a game being good, talk about the game being good and bring up why it's good, why it's fun, why people should enjoy it. Not just saying all these people interpretations of it and all these people criticisms of it are just invalid because of vague nonsense that I reference. You know, it's just like something vague does not disprove something that's factual. Right? All these characters saying things about the world being inconsistent because I don't really know how I got here. I don't really know how, why I'm here. This world is twisted and strange. The flow of time is convoluted, all this other stuff, right? That barely explains anything versus the literal fact of the matter that they put a lava castle above a poison castle that you cannot see from the ground. There is a sky above the poison castle. That elevator should not connect to Iron Keep whatsoever. Unless it went down, but it does not go down. It goes up. You are just being anti-logic at this point to protect the game you like. Right? I like Dark Souls 2. I like to play it. I really enjoy playing it. In fact, I might play it for a stream at some point. Keep that in mind. But it's just one of those things where I'm just sitting here like, explain why it is definitively good. Don't just give one list of vague comments from NPC characters to dissuade someone's literal point that the world is inconsistent at random. Right? It's not consistently random. It's randomly random. Right? It will be consistent sometimes, then it will be inconsistent in others. And you've not done a good job of explaining why it's inconsistent.
at Sky Castle twice, as if it's something incredibly shocking when we've had many moments throughout the series that are awe-inspiring without the need to lack any sense of consistency in the world. And to be perfectly honest, stuffing a level with millions of in-flight creatures isn't exactly subtle. I prefer a more subdued approach myself, but that's not something we're discussing here, so let's continue.
And it also seems as if Mahler is some kind of robot that doesn't understand that art does not need to be objectively correct, but that imperfections like nonsensical connections and overlapping areas can be used to evoke feelings, like the subtle subconscious feeling you get when the world layout.
Does anybody find it extremely ironic how he calls Mahler a soulless robot while he uses an AI-generated voice to voice his script? Does anybody find that kind of strange? A little bit ironic? That's a little bit that kind of makes me chuckle on the inside, just being like, hey, you called somebody a robot when you're literally using a robot.
Doesn't make sense by having connections between areas being much shorter than you had expected. This is playing a trick on your mind that makes you feel immersed into a character that is slowly losing their mind.
But the feelings of seeing this and the feelings of being surprised by the teleporting between inconsistent lands are just that. Subjective feelings. The objective argument that is actually being discussed is becoming skewed here in order to match his goal of proving that it is an alternate form of design and quite possibly a better one. In reality, as proven already, it is simply a moment in which the designers copped out and placed a series of structures in positions that didn't make sense where the lands previously did. This is just another thing that Harris fails to mention in his description of the land.
Mahler seems to have failed to consider that art can subvert geographical consistency in order to evoke feelings to support the obvious memory loss narrative that he missed.
The obvious...
And for some weird reason, one enemy being aggroed...
Here we go, random next video. Alright, so that video just kind of randomly ended. Okay. So that was that video. That was an experience, I guess. This video doesn't have any time signatures, so I'm kind of wondering if this is going to be a random thing, but we made it through a video. We did it. Go away, you. Go away. So, yeah, that happened. That video did largely nothing. We have time for one more. Oh, I don't know, man. This video is shorter and doesn't have sections. You know, let's do it. Why not? We're here. Let's continue to have quote unquote fun. Never mind. No, we don't. It's already been an hour and a half. I know that's an hour and a half of us just having our brains rotted. You know what? We'll continue with this anyway, since I've got time. So let's do it.
Doesn't alert others to your presence. In fact, they can get in each other's way.
A store of straight sword, they pretty much just one-shot her.
Look at this.
Mahler falsely presents this as being an issue that is unique to Dark Souls 2, even though the exact same also happens in Dark Souls 1.
They can't even come into this room. So, like, I literally ran past them. Now they're like, Steve, what do we do now? Do we just, do we go back?
Now he makes it seem as if cheesing enemies with doors does not work in every single Soulsborne game.
I think he was more pointing out that the AI was not accounting for him being in the room. This enemy is still moving. This enemy can attack through there. He probably won't show footage of that. Oh, look! There's an enemy attacking through a door. The AI is trying. The AI in Dark Souls 2 stopped trying. The AI in Dark Souls 2 has a higher chance of stopping to try. I hate to sound biased, but I rarely have that issue in DS1. It's mainly in DS2 where the AI freaks out a lot. Yeah. Well, it's that thing where Dark Souls 2 has a much higher propensity of it happening, and the AI tend to give up when you're in certain areas, where they don't even try to attack you like this enemy is here. They just straight give up, and that's it. Which is a shame. This isn't even the same point. You've got both AI coming towards you. And they okay. Notice the difference here between the clip Mahler showed.
Do we just do we go back?
The enemies weren't doing shit. This enemy
now he
is
makes
existing.
It seem as if cheesing.
This enemy is trying to attack. These enemies are getting closer. They are making an advancement. They just can't physically exist over top of each other. You're not making the point you think you are.
This isn't even the door that's blocking him. It's just a little piece of rubble.
Dark Souls 2 has several enemies without a clue on how to deal with the player if you approach certain enemies in the reverse of the way it was intended.
Mahler showed this encounter in Shrine of Amana, so let us take a look how it would play out if you start attacking them. The enemies close to those that I've attacked were alerted of my presence. But now let us also take a look at several examples of enemies in Dark Souls 1 without a clue of how to deal with the player if you approach them in the reverse of the way it was intended.
It will naturally sacrifice the benefits of engagement with your enemy.
Was he going to show a clip of Dark Souls 1? He just cut to Mahler making a point.
The way it was intended.
It will naturally sacrifice the benefits of engagement with your enemy, and you will be able to exploit them.
He acts as if this wasn't the case in DS1 as well. The next pig is even worse, as even if you do not make any sound it magically does get alerted of your presence. How could it have possibly known that I am here? Going through areas backwards of the way it was intended was always a good way to get backstabs in, so I do not understand why he falsely claims that this issue is unique to DS2.
I think this is one of those things where he keeps saying that Mahler, Domo is saying that Mahler said these issues are unique to DS2, which I'm pretty sure Mahler never said. He's just showed several examples of Dark Souls 2 having problems with that. Right, and it is one of those things where, like, I mean, there clearly are a thing where if you sneak up behind an enemy, they will not alert to you because you've snuck up behind them, right? I think part of the problem with the Dark Souls 2 stuff is that it happens so much where you get behind an enemy, they don't know how to deal with you until you actually activate them, right? I think that's really the issue of just the sheer amount of enemies that can't account for you being behind them, or just don't, and they don't do anything at all. But it is one of those things where I don't think Mahler made a point that this is a unique issue to Dark Souls 2. It's just it has it in a high frequency. You're going to defend Shrine of Amana. You're that incapable of seeing flaws in a single video game that you'll defend Shrine of Amana. That's just sad, man. That's really sad. Oh, man, this is it's an interesting series. I think one of the next videos is going to be a longer one. I think it's like 36 minutes long or something, so that should be juicy.
To me, this looks also like an easy way to exploit an enemy by going through an area backwards. Even this Capra demon gank can be exploited easily by taking on them backwards.
I mean, this is one thing I have to ask too. Why are you hiding your HUD all the time? Because we've seen that you will cheat stuff into the game. So I have to ask, like, do you have, like, the highest upgraded weapon that you can have here to help make your point? Like, I wonder why you hide the HUD all the time. I understand why that there's, like, a certain cinematic value to hiding it, but at the same time, it is one of those things where it makes me suspicious of you, especially given the fact that you've cheated stuff in before. Man, get good. That's what everyone keeps saying about Dark Souls 2 haters. Just get good, guys. Why don't you? Why don't you get good?
Here again we can see the exact same thing he was singling DS2 out for, happening in DS1 as well. The enemies do not know how to handle it if I go through this area backwards, and aggroing one of them does not alert the other of my presence.
Get good skill issue.
In DS1 you can even quit and reload to reset enemies to deal with them easier from behind.
Oh yeah. There's that super effective strategy. Hey, cheese the AI in the game by reloading the area, then deal with them. It's like, wow, that says so much about the encounters. Wow, when you use a cheese method to deal with them. Woo. Man, you really got them by saying, hey, just cheat. Just cheat the spawn system. I mean, this is one of those things, too, is like, why the hell would you go through this encounter backwards? There's no way to do this encounter backwards unless you run past everybody, reset them, and then go back to kill them. Like, there's no way this encounter would happen naturally. Right? You have to work to construct this encounter in the way you do. This evidence is not one of those clips that helps you. I think some of the other clips actually did help, but this is not one of them. I mean, I would say this is a perfect example of cherry picking, right? Where you pick an encounter where there is no reason to take this encounter backwards. You have to go out of your way to get this encounter to work backwards, and you have to essentially skip this whole area, quit out in the boss arena, and then reload to get this to exist, right? This isn't like Dark Souls 2, the Shrine of Amana bit, where he got past a bunch of dudes, there's a bonfire right behind them, and then he can respawn and then immediately see the group. You can do the dragon thing, actually. What, is there like a glitch to get around it? If you jump attack, it pops up, then you can drop down to the end. Oh. See, I did not know that. I didn't know that you could actually kill the butt. I always thought you had to, like, cheat to kill the butt. But, I mean, even then, that's still like a, you have to, even then, that's still a big difference between the Shrine of Amana clips and that clip. Yeah, I've done it every time. Yeah. I mean, while still doable, that still doesn't help him as much as I think he thinks it does, because the Shrine of Amana thing is you kill dudes in a flat area and then go to a bonfire right behind them. This is you have to do some sort of cheese to get behind the enemies. I genuinely don't know how you can kill it. Just jump attack it and walk underneath it. Once you kill the head, the butt stays there. The heads may die, but butts are forever. Thankfully, this video is a lot faster to get through. It's just him just slowly showing clips.
This one does not care that I'm fighting his friends right behind him. You can't tell me that he doesn't hear their screams.
Well, I mean, he might not. I mean, he is hollow. Who knows how good the hearing is for hollows.
several levels begin to fall apart when you realize that the developers didn't account for players taking some obvious and extra routes. Throughout the game, there are moments where enemies have no idea how to deal with you thanks to the fact that there is no preparation for players to approach from any other way than forward.
How is going backwards through Ironhearth Hall in any way an obvious way? No one except him ever had that idea. If he wants to get to the merchant, he can just take the much closer bonfire.
Who said he was going for the merchant? He didn't mention that at all. He's hollow, bro. I'd rather have that than hollow enemies being hyper-perceptive of their surroundings. Yeah. But here's the thing, right? With Mahler's clip, let's go back to it. Let's listen to Mahler's clip here, and then I'll explain something.
Developers didn't account for players taking some obvious and extra routes. Throughout the game, there are moments where enemies have no idea how to deal with you thanks to the fact that there is no preparation for players to approach from any other way than forward.
How is going
to approach from any other way than forward? That's the key thing here. A lot of these encounters are built for the enemies to see you coming from a mile away and then activate. Shrine of Amana, going through that the first time, is a great example of that, where all of these enemies are built facing towards you. You might have one or two that aren't facing towards you, but once you interact with one of them, you activate all of them. You activate the spam bush, pretty much. And what Mahler was explaining there is that all of these enemies are built to deal with you when you are facing towards them, right? As opposed to having something more meaningful, like if some of them are facing forward, some of them are facing other directions, and you can attack them from different areas, from different directions, but they will still account for you, right? I mean, there's a thing where players will usually go through an area, more than once, depending on what they want out of the area. But in Dark Souls 2, there is a high propensity that all of these enemies are going to be aiming directly at you, assuming you come in the area from the front, and a large portion of those areas, like, the enemies are not going to see you because they are all built to look at the direction you're coming from the first time through. Very few of them are actually built to account for you existing coming from any other direction than forward, and that's ultimately the underlying problem. And while this is a problem that can persist in different areas of different games, Dark Souls 2 has a massive problem with that, where a lot of areas, their AI are basically crippled by the fact that they cannot spam bush you because you can sneak up behind them just by running forward, getting to a bonfire, and then coming back. Right?
Going backwards through
I think one point with this too is that Mahler's point is that it's so simple to see the AI break all the time because there are so many bonfires right after a huge cluster of enemies. Right? There are so many bonfires right after a big group of dudes, where if you go backwards, they'll have no idea you're coming until you alert them in like close proximity. Right? Which again, that can be a problem in the other games too, but Dark Souls 2 has a huge problem with that compared to the other games.
Ironhearth Hall in any way an obvious way. No one except him ever had that idea.
I also don't know what he's talking about here about going to the merchant by the front as opposed to the back. It seems like Mahler didn't mention this at all. Like, what are you talking about right now?
For players to approach from any other way than forward.
How is going backwards through Ironhearth Hall in any way an obvious way? No one except him ever had that idea. If he wants to get to the merchant, he can just take the much closer bonfire. Going backwards out of the depths is a much more obvious way, and it also showcases the same issues he complains about. This butcher doesn't even know why he dropped down. These dogs don't even seem to notice me, even though I'm just standing a few feet in front of them.
I like how he says that when that dog is literally turning towards him the entire time. It's like they are noticing you, they're just not attacking you yet. It's like, I don't know if your AI program is just not good with English or what, but it's just one of those things where it's like they are not noticing me as dog proceeds to notice me. Does he want the dogs to track you by smell and immediately attack? I guess. Hey, look at that! The enemies do react to you when you walk around them. Just if you're not using the slow walk, they won't activate. Interesting. See, part of the problems with this video is that he's just showing just the same types of clips over and over and over in between each point. So this video could have been like 3 minutes long. If he took out like some of the stupid shit he put in and all the extra footage that just doesn't really need to be there.
This one just watches as I backstab his friend. The first one sees me and aggroes, but his friend right next to him doesn't care. Oops. Okay, let us try this again. His buddy again does not care that I just killed his friend. How did the one on the right even notice me before the one on the left did? Seems to me like they aren't hostile creatures in a living, breathing world, but just scripted AI following protocol in a video game.
Oh man, it'd be a real shame if Dark Souls 2 had the exact same problem, wouldn't it? This is one of those things, like, all of these things that he's doing are... so many defenders of Dark Souls 2 that are toxic always go after Dark Souls 1. They love criticizing Dark Souls 1 to defend their ineffable game that has a lot of the same problems as Dark Souls 1 has. If not more. Oftentimes it does have more. It's like, do you realize what you're doing when you do this stuff, right? You're not helping criticism of your game be dealt with. You're just stoking a fire between people that like Dark Souls 1 and like Dark Souls 2. And this is one thing, like, yeah, a lot of these AI have a similar issue where you can attack them from behind, right? But that little comment he made, where it doesn't sound like they're, living, breathing entities in a, or they're not real beings in a living, breathing world. It's like, you can apply that to Dark Souls 2 as well. Like, you have just self-owned the game you're supposed to be defending.
That these aren't hostile creatures in a living, breathing world, that these are just scripted AI following a protocol in a video game.
He doesn't even know why he broke the boards. He just did without knowing that I'm here.
What? What was the point of this clip?
A scripted AI following a protocol in a video game.
Okay, guy attacks him. He doesn't attack at all.
He doesn't even know why he broke the boards.
Are you talking about this one that didn't break the boards? And that must be like an editing screw up where he meant to put that audio after this. One thing here.
He just did without knowing that I'm here.
He breaks the thing, and then this guy starts to turn towards him, then kills him. It's like, what was the point of this clip? This clip doesn't show any actual problems. You showed a guy coming at you that you fail to strike for some reason until after he hits you. And then once this guy's dead, this guy...
He doesn't even know why he broke the boards. Like, he just did without knowing that I'm here.
Like, he starts to slowly turn. Like
he doesn't even know...
We get like 2 frames of him turning, but watch this.
Why he broke the...
Let's see, can we watch this in like... Let's watch this super slow.
Boards... He just did without knowing that I'm here.
See, there's that turn. There it is. He started to turn. He was aware of you. Just his animation has to reset. Also, that clip doesn't prove anything that you're trying to make a point of.
This one can clearly see me, but he just watches as I defeat his friends. He just doesn't care, because he's scripted to aggro as soon as I step on the small bridge.
I mean, and this is one of those things, right, when it comes to like designing video games where there's just a problem inherently with how do you recognize aggro ranges. My thing is that aggro ranges I don't think need to be completely realistic. Like if an enemy sees me across the map, like literally across like Undead Berg, for example, I don't expect him to aggro from all the way across the map, right? You know, like the guys that throw explosives on you when you cross the bridge after the first bonfire here. I don't expect those guys to activate if one of them might be able to catch me if I climb up the ladder that's like back here. Like I don't expect them to see me from that far away just because at that point like we're being so ultra realistic that, you know, we may as well just, you know, have all enemies aggro as soon as one of them gets alerted, right? Which becomes a clusterfuck, which becomes a problem, right? It is that element of the video game as being video gamey so that the mechanics can take place in a reasonable manner, right? I think this is just him just picking on Dark Souls 1 to try to justify Dark Souls 2 having the same issues. Can't watch a video on slow-mo without thinking of whenever EFAP covered a slow Nold vid. I have not seen that. I need to catch up on my EFAP lore. I watched a lot of the early ones, then I dipped out for like a year and a half, and then I was like, well, there's like 8,000 things I need to watch now, and they're all like 12 hours long. Let's see. I love how unfair he is to DS1 when enemies specifically behave that way in Dark Souls 2 as well. Yeah, especially when you have so many encounters that are built to gank you, but they can't gank you from behind, like when you're behind them. They specifically wait until you fall into place before attacking. Yeah. Or the Dark Souls 1 does have problems with this. Like all of the AI in these games has those issues, right? It's the aggro range thing as opposed to it's the aggro radius as opposed to aggro by sight, right? You know, which again, like there needs to be sort of a believable limit with it. And while I don't think any of these games does it particularly perfectly, I think a lot of them have a good way to deal with it in sight most of the time. But sometimes the aggro ranges are sort of small. And again, I don't know if it's mechanically they designed it to work within a radial thing, or if they have something where it's by sight and a cone effect in front of them. I don't know those behind the scenes things. But yeah, it's just one of those things where just the games don't have to be ultra realistic to have them work in an entertaining or believable way, you know. See, he's just literally just pointing out that these problems exist in both games. He isn't shitting on DS1. I mean, it's pretty inferred that he is shitting on DS1 because he doesn't bring up Mahler's argument at all when saying like, he doesn't have a throwaway line, at least not so far, that says, you know, DS2 may have the same issues, but this is a problem across both games, sort of a thing. He hasn't made that reference, so I'm assuming that he is going after Dark Souls 1 here, as opposed to saying that Dark Souls 1 has this problem and Dark Souls 2 has this issue too. Because both games have this issue. Right? This is not like a thing that... Like, this isn't an own against the Dark Souls 2 haters. He says it in another video. Well, we haven't gotten to that video yet, I guess. So, if he says it in another video, he probably should have put it here. Oh, tonal deloke, good bit of downward thrust. Oh, that's... Okay, that makes a bit more sense. Good old tonal deloke.
Dark Souls 1 is a stellar example of this problem being solved by showing innovation in terms of multiple approaches. Take Undead Berg on first approach. You have several undead to battle with, and
so I've shown that going backwards through Undead Berg does not even work as well as he claims, but let us take a few more looks at this area.
I like how he didn't let Mahler even finish his example. Like, he didn't even really begin his example, and he was just like, let's show this area before Mahler gets to throw in any context. It's the fact for me that he'll go, oh, well, Dark Souls 1 does this in the videos we've seen so far. Yeah. It's kind of the perception thing where he's leading us to believe that any criticism that is not prefaced by him saying both games have this problem, he is taking a dig at the game that has the problem instead. Let's see. I've yet to see him give any fair criticism from the game yet, and I believe this is the third vid, so I'm really losing hope. Going after DS1 is the common attack strategy for the DS2 over defenders, yeah. And his personality through the script comes off as extremely toxic and obnoxious, so for me, as someone who does like DS2, he's not it. Yeah. I mean, again, I like Dark Souls 2. I don't have any place of nostalgia for any three of the games compared to any of the other ones. I played them in the weirdest order possible. I played 2, then 1, then 3 within about a year of each other, I think. You know, it's like there's no real nostalgia between them. I got into all of them at the same time. You know, just a lot of the arguments are just like, you're just a DS1 fanboy. And it's like, I like Dark Souls 1. That doesn't make me a fanboy of it. Right? I like Dark Souls 1 just like I'd like any other good game. And even then, Dark Souls 2 has significant issues. I still think it's a good game. It's just a poor sequel to the Souls games that came before it. And I like it. I like Dark Souls 2. And also, this is just that thing about Mahler's sort of... Mahler's getting ready to make a point, and then he says, let's go through this area and, you know, completely go against Mahler's point that I didn't let him finish making. It's either very malicious to do that, where you don't let the other side produce their evidence, or it's very manipulative to just assume he's made his point and then move on.
He is watching me fight his friend, but just does not care as I did not enter his aggro range yet. The third one again does not get alerted of my presence, even though he watches me fight.
I feel like this is one of those things where he's just nitpicking Mahler's point just to basically, you know, without thinking of what is he what is his counter solution to the aggro radius sort of issues we have with AI? Is it just as soon as anybody sees you across any distance ever, the AI react? Right? Is that essentially what he's going for? Just any AI that can see you from any distance should automatically aggro you no matter how far away and take the correct pathing to reach you. Is that what he wants with this? Now, this is one thing. I do think that there are problems with the AI in both Dark Souls 1 and 2 at this point, right? They both have significant issues when you try to kind of go back through an area and fight the enemies there, right? But completely skipping over Dark Souls 2's same problems compared to this, and not mentioning it in this video is a significant problem, because this is the time to mention it. And if he's not going to mention it for the rest of the video, then, you know, just you've blatantly made yourself look bad. That is how it comes across. He wants AI that will notice you at the drop of a hat or from extreme distances like in Shrine of Amana. Yeah, imagine if every enemy in Shrine of Amana activated on the view system that he keeps kind of like bringing up. Imagine how screwed Shrine of Amana would be then if every enemy within sight of the player activated. And in turn, a lot of groups in Dark Souls 2 activate when you attack one of them. So if you activated one from a distance, you'd probably drag their entire group with you, right? So I don't think if he's thought this far down the line in terms of what problems it would produce if you had everything aggro by sight as soon as you're within eyesight. That would do nothing but funnel players into using a bow like he does in his DS2 clips, which would not be fun. Yeah, it's one of those things where there's like, I feel like each individual point he tries to counter in Mahler's videos has him create his own point that he doesn't take into account given a lot of the other points he's said, right? Because I remember in the last stream when we went over his first video, it seemed really odd how he was using all of these really niche and weird ways to defeat enemies rather than the core combat mechanics of the core combat, right? Like it feels like he's going out of his way to make a point and then forgets what his counter argument means when put next to his other counter arguments. You know, it makes me wonder what kind of game he ultimately wants things to be, you know. And like right now, like we're going down the rabbit hole of like, or we're going through the thought process of, if he doesn't want them to work on a radius, does he want them to work by sight? And if he does want them to work by sight, how far is sight before it becomes a problem where you start aggroing too many enemies? You know, it's like we're overcomplicating this because he has led us to believe that sight would be better than just a radial aggro. I'll never forget him trying to demonstrate the use of a barrel I didn't know existed and shooting it just for it to kill not a single enemy. Yeah. Now, upon looking through that clip again, I think the barrel did damage enemies. I don't think it killed them, though. It didn't kill any of them, but I think it did damage them in that one clip you're referencing. But either way, it's still one of those things where it's like, you know, just negate the core combat, use niche to avoid big group of enemy swarm. So you gonna make a point or just show this stuff over and over and over?
This would be what Harris is talking about when you zero in one approach and forget other simple possibilities for players.
How did he even get to those ogres from behind? Was this simple approach yet another one of those obvious paths that no one except for him ever took, as there's much closer bonfires available where you do not have to run all the way from Dragonary? Seems to me like he did pretty unusual things in order to artificially make DS2 look worse.
Oh man, it seems like you did some unintentional weird things to make DS2 look better. You can't keep countering their arguments by literally doing the thing that you claim they are doing. It's also one of those things, just I feel like this was such a lazy video for him to make. Like, he didn't even put timestamps in. Most of this is just random footage of him going behind enemies to deal with shit. And he probably talks for a total of like 3 minutes in this video. The same way you, damn it, you beat me to it, but literally.
While falsely claiming that those issues aren't present in every single Souls game. Now for the end, here's a funny one that requires glitches to get to this state.
Why do you preface it like that? If it requires glitches to get to this point, you may as well not reference it.
Scholar of the First Sin
Yep, there's the next video. That was it. He literally does these things that hardly anyone's doing and then shits on someone for supposedly doing the same thing but opposite. Yeah. It's just so much just... Oh, man. See, this thing will be interesting because we're starting to get into the movement. That'll be interesting, but probably have to tackle that next time because this video actually has timestamps, so he must have cared about this one. You treat us so well today. Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. That last video was really easy to get through. He basically made like 3 points that were largely the same and then just showed footage over and over and over. I can deal with someone making a point, but you could at least do it in an entertaining way rather than just showing the same type of clip over and over and over. Or what you think is the same type of clip over and over and over. Oh, man. And this is the one thing, too. I need to work on building up... I need to work on... making certain things work, because what I'm thinking we probably should do is I'm trying to think of we're basically done with reacting to videos for now, but I do want to try to sort of get something set up so I can have chat on screen recording in real time, because I would like to do that while I'm on, because I've got enough minutes to work on this for a little bit while we can still chat about things, while this video is not really going anymore. So I'm going to mess around with OBS for a minute, so if you want to chat anything, let me know, and we can talk about it. Trying to find out. This is the thing, right? Like, I really love the EFAP format where you have the video and then you have like the Discord people on the bottom, then you have the chat on the right. I really like that format, and I'm trying to copy it, and I'm really bad at copying it. Still here. I'm blood gem farming in Bloodborne, and man, it's a nightmare. Good luck! Good luck in the nightmare of farming for the nightmare. Oh, man. This is hard. Have you played Lies of P at all? I have not. I need to. It's on the list. I've got so many things I need to play, man. It's insane. I might oh, you have the platinum sheep? Well, good job. Beat me to it. Yeah, I need to check out Lies of P. Sorry I missed most of the stream, but what's the overall perspective on Domo's video, and do you think Mahler has better points or not? Short version is Domo makes a couple of points in a very clunky way that could have been used to help defend Dark Souls 2, but he ends up going after Mahler in sort of a nitpicky fashion like he did with the first video we reacted to. So it's largely the same problems as before, where decent bit of hypocrisy, some good points that he missed, a lot of really strange points that no one's going to infer. That or I'm not going to say no one, that a lot of people are not going to be able to infer. Making up stuff in the lore that's, making up a conclusion to vague lore to kind of help his point to go against Mahler's points for narrative stuff. It was largely just a mess, kind of like the first video. Actually, no, the first video was the best one so far because he actually had a point. He had some points to be made. He actually showed some good evidence to, counter some things. These last two videos that we watched were really bad, especially this last one, which was basically just the same point over and over and over for 12 minutes. And then he threw in some random things as sort of insults to add to injury. So overall, not that good. Domo comes across as toxically positive towards the game, and that really makes it hard to take him seriously. Yeah, because the best way to deal with a game faithfully is to give it praise when it deserves it and to give it criticism when it deserves it, right? Like, no game's perfect, and no game is absolute dog shit, right? There is always something that they have done right, right? There's always something that they've probably done wrong, or something that they've done in like a lackluster way. There's always something. It just feels like people need to forget about, like, they need to separate criticism from hate, because criticism is not hate, and hate is not criticism, right? There's a difference, and it seems like so many people nowadays don't know that and don't care. And that's a problem in and of itself. Where it's just like, how do we do this? Pretty much. It's just one of those weird things where I'm sitting here wondering about it. All right, I'm gonna try something. Let's see. I'm doing this in a weird way here, so I'm working on trying to get this set up like EFAP. But hey, nuance is tough. It shouldn't be as hard as it is. It feels like it's way harder than it needs to be. Alright. Sorry, I'm trying to work out how to get chat on screen in a way that'll work. Let's see. Here we go. So I can have... Let's see here. I think I've got a decent bit going on right now. Let's see. Let's display capture. Well, that's trippy. We got ESAS within ESAS. I wonder if I need to like break this up where like we have the... See, let's try this. We're doing some tech support stuff right now, so if you want to leave the stream, that's fine. I'm just keeping it up in case you guys want to talk about anything for the next little bit while I work on this. All right, so that would be... That's like the full thing. There's something. I'm trying desperately to make this work like EFAP, and I'm having issues. See, I wonder, can I... All right, I'm trying a lot of different things here. Forgive me for being very incompetent at doing this stuff.
YouTube Premium is ad-free YouTube and ad-free videos on the YouTube.
Seems like he considers the movement effectively bad just because he never even considered to turn the camera. I can turn any direction at will, so I would categorize his complaint as it's bad because...
All right, so yeah, I don't think I can get everything working the way we want to right now. But I'm gonna keep working on it. I'm trying to make this into sort of an EFAP thing, so we'll see if I can copy their format very effectively or not. But yeah, just thank you guys for sticking around for ESAS. We're continuing on. We're gonna continue on through this series. I'm trying to see what we've got left. So we've gotten through 3 videos so far. The next video is going to be 11 minutes long. Then the next several videos after that are all upwards of like 20 minutes. Some of them breaching 30, some of them breaching 40. So those might be ones we spend several days sort of talking about. But we'll get there when we get there. But for now, I'd just like to thank you all for coming for this stream. I hope you all have a wonderful Saturday. And, just thank you all for hanging out, and God bless.